Good to be with you. My name is Andy Abramson, and excited to talk to you today around vision and strategy of your ministry. I want to share a little bit about who I am. So here is myself and my 5 kids. So have the unique privilege of coaching college ministry leaders, working in a college ministry, and being a dad of college students. So I feel like that I get it on all different sides, which is really, really fun. Brooke and Abby here are my twins. They're 21 years old. Macy is 19. Riley's 16. Drew, who's actually taller in that picture than when it was taken in Christmas by an inch or two, is 14 years old. And so we live in Austin, Texas. We actually run a ministry called Elementum, where we work alongside local churches to either start or develop college or young adult ministries. And so really excited to be with you. So I'm going to grab the door real quick just so we don't get people coming around us. Okay, so here we're going to do. Here's what I want to do is let's spend a couple minutes and ask the question, what is vision? Okay, so we hear about this all the time, right? Vision, it's on books, podcasts, we hear about it, we talk about it, we see it, we know it's important, but the question really is what is vision? So what I want to do is let's define what I mean by vision, what we're going to use vision in terms of our terminology today is here's what we're talking about. Is vision is the ability to see a God-inspired future. Okay, so we're looking future-oriented, and God is giving us a picture of what that future is and take steps towards it. For college ministry, vision isn't just about the distant horizon. It's about finding clarity for today while dreaming boldly for the future. So here's what I want you to think about vision. It's both future-oriented as well as action-based for what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Okay, so we want to think about future as well as current action. It's a God-given picture of what could be rooted in what He is doing in and through your ministry right now. Okay, so we're going to spend a few minutes and just talk about vision within your ministry, talk about strategy within your ministry. Here's what I want to do for just a couple minutes is we're going to give you a couple tools and assessments that you can utilize in your ministry. Then I want to give you a framework that you can implement in your ministry to help build out the vision. Okay, so let's talk about this first. There's 4 stages of vision. Okay, 4 stages of vision. Stage number 1 is vision receiving. Okay, so this is the stage in which we're asking God to give us that picture, help us understand what the future looks like, and so we're receiving that vision. Okay, stage 2 is vision casting. Now, this is what we think a lot of times about when we think about vision, is how we're then communicating that vision. Right? So after we've received the vision, the second thing we want to do is think about casting vision. Stage 3 is vision inviting. Okay, so once we've received it, once we've casted it, the next stage is we're going to invite people to participate in it. Right? So we're saying, okay, here's the vision, here's what it looks like, here's the picture of the future, I want to share that with you. Who's in with me? Who are the people that are going to put their hands to the plow and begin to help us push the vision forward? So we want to begin to think about vision inviting. And then the last stage is vision stewarding. Those of you who've been in ministry for any length of time, you understand the reality of vision drift. Right? There's moments where you feel like you're clear in vision, you're moving forward, and then all of a sudden you look around and say, man, we're a little bit off course right now. Or, right, as new students come, as new leaders come, they come up and say, hey, David, at our college ministry, we used to do this. We should do it too. Or, hey, what about sports ministry? Or what about this? Or what about that? And so there can be a tendency then to begin to add things on top of that vision, and then all of a sudden it's not where God's calling you to go. Okay? So vision receiving, vision casting, vision inviting, vision stewarding. Here's what I want you to do. Turn to the person next to you. What stage are you in right now? Vision receiving, vision casting, vision inviting, or vision stewarding? take 1 minute and share with somebody next to you.
Brandon? Are you at Fort Collins, Colorado? Awesome. Yeah. Is that Colorado State? Nice. Yep, we got Colorado State. And we got, I think we're like right yeah, man, where are you at? I'm in yeah, I graduated from that. Yeah, I stayed up there. Potential spot for a church plant. And because from what I've heard, from what I've seen, anyways, what stage are you at?
Vision casting, man. I just got hired on by a church 5 days ago. This college ministry. I've been doing college ministry as a staff member, 6 years, staff and student 10 years. So I'm in a very vision receiving, very much vision receiving.
I would say, I would probably go for I would say, no, actually, I'm going to go to casting and inviting. The vision that we have is Acts and EOTP, witnesses to the end of the that's the vision, and that's our mission statement, vision for the entire church, to equip every generation. Do it with his love.
Okay, let's do a quick poll here. How many of you would say that you're currently in the vision receiving stage? Okay, vision receiving. Now, here's what I want to say is just because you've been in ministry a while, sometimes there's a new cycle, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, of a new cycle of a new vision that God's given you for the next part of the future, okay? So just because you've been in ministry doesn't mean you can't go back to vision receiving. So just a little caveat there. How about vision casting? How many of you are kind of in the vision casting stage right now? Okay, a couple people. How about vision inviting? Vision inviting? Good. Okay, vision stewarding. Anybody vision stewarding? Cool. Okay. So here's what I want to do is I want to talk to you a few minutes about 5 questions that we need to answer. Okay? Before we jump into vision, there are 5 questions we need to double down on to begin to assess and help us as we begin to build out our vision. Okay. Question number 1 is this question of what? What are we called to do? So this big question of what. I want you to think about what as this idea of mission. Okay? This is really your mission. We use a picture in mission of being like your compass, right? Your due north. So at any point, Hunter in Houston should be able to say, okay, are we heading in the right direction? Are we accomplishing the mission that God has called us to do? Now, here's what I want to say. A lot of times when we work with churches, what we see in the mission is what we call general mission. Here's what I mean by general mission. General mission is the mission that all of us have been called as believers to be a part of. Love God, love people, make disciples. Yes. Right? But here's the reality, is the mission contextually can look different for David than it can for Nick. Right? How has their communities been called to live out the Great Commandment, the Great Commission in a unique way? Right? So this is how we do that on our campus. This is how we do that with our church. And so we want to think beyond just general mission and actually get down into how has God called our community to live out the general commission in a unique way. Okay? So this question of what are we called to do? The second question is why are we called to do it? This is really this idea of values. Values. Think about this picture as being like a fire in your belly. This is the motivation behind why you do what you do. Here's the reality is I could walk into all of your ministries over the next month and begin to identify what your values are. What's really important to you? What are the things that you hold to? Everybody has unique values, and we want to begin to identify what those values are and either intentionally move those or begin to remove those values if they're not legit values of what we want them to be. Okay, so values. The next question is, when are we successful? This is our measures. Our measures. The picture we use for this is like a bullseye. Right? So we understand of asking the question, when are we successful? What does a win look like in our ministry? Here's what happens. If you don't define what the win is for your ministry, you're giving people the right to define it for themselves. Right? So you could have 5 different people on a leadership team all have a different measure of success that can say, yes, we're being successful, or no, we're being successful. And so we have to clearly identify what those measures are. Question number 4, how are we called to do it? This is our strategy. This is our strategy. Think about this as being a map. What is our strategy for when we have a student come into our ministry? How do we disciple them? How do we connect them? What's the path? And here's what I want to encourage you to think about in terms of strategy. Think map, not menu. Here's what I mean by that, is most of our strategy is a buffet. Right? Let's throw that on the table, and that on the table, and that on the table, and then here you can have your plate and go figure out what you want to put on it. Versus a map of saying, when a person comes in, here's where we want them to go. After they go here, here's where we want them to connect to. After they connect here, here's the invitation to them next. So we're thinking map, not menu in our strategy. And then the last one is, where are we going? And this is the vision. This is the vision. And in this, we have a picture of what that preferred future is. So what are we called to do? Why are we called to do it? When are we successful? How are we called to do it? Where are we going? Now, here's the value in answering these questions. These create boundaries for what you say yes to and what you say no to. Because somebody's going to come up to you inevitably and say, hey, I got an idea for what? This right here. And how do you know what you say yes to, what you say no to? You can run it through this grid of saying, okay, does it help us accomplish our mission? Does it cultivate the values in our ministry? Does it help us hit our bullseye? Is it fit into our map of our strategy? And does it help us accomplish our vision? And so what I would encourage you to do is, if you can answer these questions even before developing a vision, what it does is actually create some guardrails for your vision of what you say yes to, what you say no to. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. And so I'm going to give you 3 tools to assess vision and strategy right now. We're going to talk about life cycles. We're going to talk about stages of ministry development. And we're going to talk about growth barriers. Okay, now here's a couple things I want to say about this. These are actually some of the exact same things that we utilize when we assess where a ministry's at. Okay, now I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot view of a lot of this stuff. It's a lot deeper and a lot more complex than this, but at least it'll get you going in the right direction. Okay, so here's some assessment tools that we can utilize. Okay, the first one is what we call ministry life cycles. Ministry life cycles. Okay, in a ministry life cycle, we want to think about this question of from birth to ministry to the death of a ministry. Now, obviously, we don't want our ministries to die, and that's kind of the point. But we need to recognize is what causes us maybe to be on that backside of this life cycle. Okay, so I want to look at a couple different pieces. Number one is I want to look at where is our focus at. Okay, so where should our focus be based off of each of these different stages in the life cycle? Secondly, is what is the goal in each of these stages? And then lastly, what does it feel like? Like, what does it feel? What are you kind of feeling as you're in that stage, okay? Now, in this focus section, I want to highlight 4 different areas, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent them by either a capital letter or a lowercase letter. The capital letter will be a primary focus. A lowercase letter will be a secondary focus, okay? So the first one is going to be vision, which will be represented by a V. The R is going to represent relationships. The P is going to represent programming. And the M is going to represent management. Okay, so let's talk about the birth stage. Primarily, the focus of the birth stage is uppercase V. It's vision. Okay? Often in the birth stage, we are leading with vision. But then in kind of some secondary focuses, we're having relationships, programming, and management, but they are nothing compared to leading with vision. Okay? So vision is going to be the primary dominant focus of this birth section. Okay? The goal in this is launch. Okay, this is the launch phase. We're trying to get a ministry off the ground, and what it feels like is early struggle. How many of you have launched a ministry in here? Anybody launched a ministry? Easy or hard? Hard, right? You're just like pushing, come on, we can get this thing going. There's this early kind of launch struggle that we're going through, but we're primarily leading with vision, but not needing as much focus on relationships, programming, and management, okay? So as we begin to move up this life cycle, now we need to begin to add in formalizing the relationships. How are we going to reach freshmen? What does inviting new people to come into our ministry? So we're thinking strategically, not just about leading with vision, but now how are we going to begin to organize those relationships, invite those, and be more strategic with those relationships? But we're still not needing much programming or management. It's driven primarily by vision, primarily by relationships, and secondarily by programming and management, okay? The goal in this is momentum. It's momentum. And what it feels like is fun. This is kind of like, when you get a ministry off the ground and it's going to survive, and it's all of a sudden that you're like ministering to students and students are coming to know the Lord, and it's like, okay, this is fun. We're building some momentum. Things are happening. We're thinking about relationships. How are we going to reach freshmen? So there's beginning to be this momentum in the ministry. Then we begin to move up the life cycle. Now we need to think about, we got these relationships coming. How do we begin to organize programming within these relationships? Right, so now we're thinking about, okay, we got relationships coming. We're not connecting with all the people that we need to connect with. We're losing people out of the back door. Okay, what is some of the programming that we can introduce that will begin to organize these relationships to help us begin to move forward? Okay, the goal in this stage is going to be strategic growth. And what this feels like is whitewater. Anyone ever been rafting before? Man, super fun, but a little bit scary. You're just kind of like, oh, somebody fell out. Let's go grab them in, right? Hey, this is really good, but it's a little bit chaotic here. When you get to this point in ministry where you're beginning to move towards strategic growth, it becomes a little bit chaotic. a little bit unorganized, a little bit like, we don't know, things are falling through the cracks. And so you're moving into that strategic growth stage. And then we move to the top, and this is where we need to begin to think about the management of that. So now it's high vision, high relationships, high programming, high management. What the goal of this is sustained health. And what this feels like is predictable success. Right? So this is a point where, man, your ministries are moving, lives are being changed, you know how you're doing things, everybody's in their gift mix, like things are moving well, you know how to reach the campus, you're reaching freshmen, things are happening. And so there's this moment of like, things are beginning to roll, strategic growth, sustained health is happening, predictable success. But here's what happens is if we're not careful, we begin to slide down the backside where vision begins to slip, right? So now we move from uppercase to lowercase, where primarily we're driven by relationships, programming, and management, but vision begins to wane. It begins to drip. It begins to leak. What happens in this stage is we move into maintenance. Right? We're moving into maintenance, and what it feels like is what we call the treadmill. So you're running, things are happening, things are going, but like, okay, are we going anywhere? Like, are we still moving where we're supposed to be going? And so we're feeling like we're slipping a little bit where vision is now beginning to slide. Then we begin to move further down this backside, so now we begin to lose relationships, and primarily driven by programming and management. The goal is preservation. What it feels like is what we call the big rut. Right? So now we're in this where now we're beginning to lose relationships, and it's all driven by programming and management. Lastly, we begin to move down towards the bottom, where it's low vision, low relationships, low programming, and only dealing with management. And if you've ever been about a part of church that's just about management, it's pretty horrible. Okay? What happens in this is what we call life support. And what it feels like is what we call death rattle. Thanks, Siri. Okay? So this is the life cycle of ministry. Now, here's the challenge. Is the goal for your ministry is not to slide down to death. But what actually can happen is as we begin to kind of hit this top section, the goal would actually to begin to loop into a new life cycle. Of saying we're at the top, how do we recast vision into a new life cycle where we then begin to loop up? Now, here's a word of caution. The further down you are on the backside, the more energy and the more time it takes to loop into a new life cycle. I've had churches that have contacted us who've been in preservation and life support and said, hey, we're down to about 20 members. Can you help us launch a college ministry? They're all above 80 and dying. And you're just like, maybe, but that's going to be a lot of energy, a lot of work, a lot of commitment to change, a lot of commitment to vision. So the encouragement is saying the quicker that you can catch this on the backside, the easier it's going to be to loop into a new vision life cycle. Now, here's what I would say is the challenge. I would say is most of you probably are on, even the last one I would say was kind of from the maintenance down here. Now, here's one of the challenges we experience. Sometimes you're here and your church is here. Sometimes you're driven by vision and they're in preservation. And so those are difficult things that we have to navigate as a part of a ministry within a local church. Okay, so here's the question. Turn to the person next to you. Which stage are you in right now in your ministry? Which stage on the life cycle, where are you at? Go ahead and discuss that.
It is the fun part of Amen. I get to develop it, right?
Yeah, mine's pretty easy. My task and job description, priority.
Yeah, where you guys are.
I'm kind of birthing it right now. But I would say pretty early. I would like taking it out of face, seeing things. I think the and so we're at investor relations. We're like, I think we're but we have a space sort of similar. I think one more year, not doing well. We're in the same not the business of whatever issues, just space. So we have to cast where do we want to
You put in the work to make sure you know.
It's not exciting. Yeah. So you're learning management.
Trying to get that momentum.
Okay, let's do a quick poll here. How many of you are in the launch phase? Launch phase? The launch phase? Okay, how many of you would be in the momentum? In the momentum? Any momentum people? Okay, strategic growth. Okay, got a few people in strategic growth. Sustained health. Okay. Maintenance. Okay. Preservation. Probably not. Life support. Okay. So kind of similar as last time, as we kind of hit a little bit on the maintenance side all the way down to the birth and the launch side. Okay, so that's one tool that you can utilize to assess where your ministry's at in terms of vision. Okay, here's the second one, and what you're going to see is there's going to be some overlap in each of these tools. We're going to talk about stages of development. If you ever get on a call with me, one of the things I'll talk to you about is the stages of building a ministry. And the analogy I always use is like building a house, right? Is if David asked me, hey, Andy, I know you're building a house. Tell me the plan of what you're doing. And I were to tell David, first I'm going to build the roof, right? And after I build the roof, I'm going to paint the kitchen. After I paint the kitchen, I'm going to pour the concrete. David look at me and think, bro, you're an idiot. That's not how you build a house. Now, we laugh about that, but we do that same thing when we're building our ministries. We build a little bit of the roof, a little bit of the foundation, a little bit of paint, a little bit of shrubbery. Like we kind of hop back around. Here's the example of how this that I see this play out quite a bit. It's in conferences like this. Right, we go to breakout sessions and we do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of that. A few years ago, I was speaking at Send Summit up in Lubbock, and I was sitting in Brandon's leadership pipeline breakout session. Right, so I'm speaking, but I'm going to sit in and listen to it. And I sit down next to this guy, and I'm like, "Hey, tell me about yourself." He's like, "Hey, I just been in Lubbock like 3 or 4 months. I'm leading the Lutheran Campus Ministries." I'm like, okay, tell me a little bit about that ministry. Well, we got like 2 students and we're trying to figure out what to do. I'm like, okay. So then Brandon gives the whole spiel of leadership pipeline. And I turn to him and I say, hey, what do you think? He's like, I figured it out. I'm like, what? He's like, I need to build a leadership pipeline. I'm like, bro, you need to build a leader, not a leadership pipeline, right? So sometimes we can get so mesmerized by future things of what other people are doing that we don't understand the sequential nature of building. So what I want to do for just a couple minutes is I want to walk through really 6 different stages of ministry of what you should be focusing in. Now, here's what I want to encourage you. When I hit your stage of where you're at, it's not just that area that you're responsible for, but also everything in front of it. So sometimes I'll do an assessment and figure out that they're at stage 2, but they have some gaps in stage 0 and stage 1 where they actually need to fix to actually be more effective as they build in stage 2. So think about these as actually being able to stack on top of each other. Okay, so stage 0, we'll call this the launch. Let me go back to black here. So this is launch. I'll give you kind of a couple things that we want to focus in on the launch stage. Number 1 is, do we have a leader? Okay? So my friend here from Colorado started college pastor how many weeks ago? 5 days ago, right? 0.8 weeks ago. He is the leader. And often that's what you need to start. Who's the leader? Does a church have somebody who says, I'm going to take the initiative. I'm going to move this forward. I'm going to be responsible for beginning to see this off the ground. Okay, so we want to focus on leader. And the first thing, or the second thing in the launch stage, is we want to begin to disciple a few. Right? Man, how many times I talk to a church who wants to launch something, and I'm like, tell me what you're thinking. We just want to get to a service. Let's just launch a midweek. And I'm like, man, just start discipling a few people. Like, just start with, like, grab a few guys, grab a few gals, if you're a gal, and, like, begin to pour your life into them, build relationships, and that will be the bedrock in which you can build a house on. Think about this stage in terms of, like, the house building as just, like, clearing the ground. We're not building anything yet. We're not launching anything. We're not starting anything. I'm just a leader. I'm going to begin to disciple a few people. I'm going to invest in relationships and begin to see what God wants to do. Okay? Stage 1 is going to be what we call foundation. In the foundation stage, there's a couple things that we want to focus on. Number 1 is team, and 2 is a disciple-making strategy. So we want to think about not just a leader, but who are the we? Right? Who are the other people that have ownership of this ministry and really begin to care? These can be adult volunteers. These can be students of saying, like, this is the we that are going to begin to invest in this ministry and begin to really begin to push the vision forward with me as well. We also want to think about how do we help them now disciple people. Right? What's the pathway, a strategy that we want to give them for discipling a few people? Okay, so that's the foundation stage. Number 3 is stage 2 is going to be what we call future. And in the future stage, we want to primarily look at vision and strategy. Now, here's the challenge. You're sitting in a breakout session talking about vision and strategy. Right? Really, what we're talking about is stage 2 stuff. So here's my encouragement for some of you who are not in the vision and strategy. How do you look at this first before you jump into building a robust vision and strategy? Right? So what does it look like for you to make sure you're a leader that's discipling a few, that has a team, and that has a disciple-making strategy? The best visions that are built out are the ones who ask the question, how do we accelerate what God is doing on our campus? There's so much things that are happening. How do we see more of this in more pockets, on more campuses, in more lives of students? And so this is this question of, like, how do we invite other people to be a part of this? Okay, so this is the future stage. The next one is the build. In the build stage, we want to look at systems and pipelines. Okay? Now, here's what I want to say. Ultimately, this stage, in stage 3, should support where we're going in the future. So this question where Brandon was teaching on leadership pipeline, what I believe is a leadership pipeline is the vehicle to help us get to where we're going to. Right? So if this is the destination, what's the car we need to build? Oh, we need a residency program. We need to partner with a few IMB missionaries. We need to do these things because that's going to be the vehicle, the systems, the structures, the pipelines that are going to help us get to where we want to get to. Everybody loves this. You go to conferences and these are like the big 2 right here. Like everything's like leadership pipelines and multiplication systems and strategy and vision. And those are all amazing things. But I'll just reiterate, if you don't have these things, it's just going to be like your wheels that are spinning in the sand. Okay? Stage 4 is going to be our multiply stage. Multiply. And what we want to see in the multiply stage is multiple levels of leaders and multiple levels of disciples. So by the time you get to this point, you should actually have multiple generations of discipleship. Right? So this person discipled that person, and that person discipled that student, and that student is now investing into that student. And we have a core team, and then we have these teams over here that are leading missions, and this team that's leading worship. And so we're beginning to see multiple levels of leadership and multiple levels of discipleship. And then in stage 5, this is sending. This is the sending stage. And in this, we want to have a sending strategy. And we want to begin to see new things happen. This new plants, new individuals, new ministries, new initiatives. We want to see sending happening within our ministry. Okay? So launch, foundation, future, build, multiply, send. Here's what I would say. A lot of times when we're working with a church, I would say in these different stages is probably 9 to 18 months of work. It's often not fast to get through these different things to do it well. And so what I would encourage you is figure out what stage you're in, maybe what are some of the gaps before you, and then be patient with some of those things you need to build. Okay, so once you turn to the person next to you, what stage are you in? And here's the second question. Are there any gaps in the things behind you that you need to focus in on and begin to maybe work as you move forward? Okay, so go ahead and turn and discuss that.
So we're.
Hi, I'm Kate.
I think we were residents, some young adults.
I'm a resident.
I think we're.
Did you do the forge? I know.
Yeah, so kind of interesting. They're kind of interviewed.
Yes.
So we have like we passed past he had visions for a band college. There's some areas that like that. But then the main pastor stepped down.
I graduated this time. I'm going in this
system.
So he's definitely behind it, obviously.
Like you gotta look at the house now. Like
I think the church is.
like that's probably where y'all are at.
because they love the idea of
You're not really building this
I
out
think
anymore.
we're in a weird, like, I did it a little too fast. So we're still, there's some goals and build. So I feel like we're in a
never try. You're just like,
Why not?
why not? Yeah, so it's pretty cool. I'd say most of the congregations.
Freaked out.
Dude, all the I'm obviously pumped, man. Like, I love college students. I think my deal to reach college students like that. That excitement, thinking about all these
Okay, let's do this quick poll. How many of you stage 0? Stage 0? Okay, stage 1, foundation stage. Any foundation stage here? Future, build. Okay, multiply.
I'm like in between 3 and 4.
Okay, and then sending. Okay, yeah, Redeemer. You guys are sending. Yep, cool. Okay, so here's what I would encourage you to do. Man, college ministry is changing, and students are changing so quickly that it's easy to just assume that you have that without consistently kind of evaluating, right? So what I would encourage you is pull this out occasionally and say, okay, like, do we have a clear vision? Do we have a clear strategy? What is our team like? Okay, is our disciple-making strategy clear? And so begin to ask some of these questions no matter where you're at. Okay, here's the last tool I want to give you, is thinking through numerical growth barriers. One of the things that you'll see is there's different points along the way that will cause you to need to change things to move forward. Okay, so the example I always use is most churches in America are about 80 to 100 people. Like if you look across the board, that's by and far, that's the largest number is under 80 people, under 100 people. Well, why is that? Because that is the ability for one person to maintain relationships. Right? A person can maintain about 80 to 100 relationships. And so you have these pastors who say, man, I care for all these people. I shepherd all these people. I know all their names. I do their funerals. I do their weddings. Like I relationally know all those people. The challenge is to break that barrier would require you to shift the way that you do things and shift your structures. Now, here's what I want to say, is not everybody's called to do that. Right? Some people are just called to shepherd a group of 60, 70, 80 people for the rest of their lives and be faithful. And we want to celebrate those people. So it's not all about like, hey, we got to break this barrier, but what's your sweet spot? And how is God calling you to lead? Okay? So let's talk about this. Now, I'm going to give you the first few barriers. You actually can trace this up to about 5,000 people of what those barriers are. Probably don't need to have some of those upper numbers for here, most of the people in here. So we're just going to kind of focus on the first few of these bottom barriers, okay? So the first one is going to be, I'll just call this a barrier of about 8 to 12 people, right? So if you've ever started something, it's this question of like, you're trying to like herd cats a little bit. You know, you're trying to like get people in and like, okay, relationships. And so here's what we want to think about in this kind of 8 to 12 people is we want to begin to develop some group dynamics. The challenge a lot of times when we're working with churches that are just launching something is to get from the me to the we. Right? It's like you have these kind of individual college students who are floating out there, and how do you like kind of corral them together so there's some kind of relational stickiness amongst the group. So we're working through group dynamics. We need to focus on the relationship with the leader. In this stage is just saying, like, how can the leader invest in specific relationships and understand where the pockets of college students and young adults are in your city? So you think about kind of this stage as we're looking for how do we create group dynamics, how do we develop relationships with the leader, how do we understand where the pockets are in our city, okay? So the next one is you're going to hit a barrier probably between about 25 and 35. And what you need to have in this is a willing leader, a group identity. So think about like not just a group that is committed to each other, but there's a sense of like now this we of like collectively together moving forward. And what I would say is no outside pressure. Outside pressure can be things like budgets, space. There's a gal who's in my collab that I'm helping lead who's a volunteer. And she's like, man, I would love to give more time, but I literally have 5 hours a week and that's all I can give. That's an outside pressure. That's going to be hard. She's going to bump up against that number of 25 to 35 because there's that pressure that she's feeling. Okay? The next one is going to be kind of your 80 to 100. And in this, you need to begin to focus on team leadership. Mid-sized groups dynamics. Here's what I mean by that. Let me write it first. So you need to think about different layers of ministry. Right? So often within this size, you can't just have one strategy. You need to we have our midweek, and then we have our community groups, and then we have our one-on-one. So you're thinking about how to slot different people into different parts of the ministry. So you're beginning to have some mid-sized group dynamics. And then the last one here is you need to have a disciple-making strategy, a clear disciple-making strategy. I'll just put DM strategy. Okay, the last one here is going to be about your 225. You need to break this, you need to have some more high-level communication, right? And I would say communication both on like logistics, but also at this point, you probably need to have a leader who has some decent communication skills to break the 225. So high-level communication, clear vision, and outreach strategies. What we see in this is there's a few churches we're working on right now where they don't necessarily have a clear vision and their outreach strategies are a little bit weak, and so they're bumping up against this 225 barrier and can't break past that, okay? So why don't you go ahead and do this real quickly, turn to the person next to you, where are you currently at right now in terms of the barrier that you're hitting? Or kind of on that progression, and then based off that progression, maybe some things that you need to focus on these different numerical growth barriers. Okay?
Not at all.
Yeah, we're trying some young adults. We need to figure out what college students
As a transition,
there are some college yeah, where are you guys at?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
I can't show up.
Everything together.
I would like this one.
I think originally part of the meeting for them. So what hours I was like 8 hours.
And he'll be there.
Like how am I going
Starting with the big
well, like that high level communication.
Like forming the
Okay, here we go. Last thing. So what I'm going to do next is I want to give you a framework. So now that you've looked at kind of these assessments of where you're at, what does building out a vision look like? There's a tool that we utilize called the Horizon Storyline. Okay, and this is one of my favorite things to help leaders think through, is how do you build both the long-term as well as the short-term vision in your ministry. Okay, so we think about this tool, the Horizon Storyline. Think about a picture. Right? Let's say there's a landscape picture. There's different layers in that picture. Right? There's things that are way off into the distance as well as things that are right in front of you. And so how do we begin to identify the different horizons in that picture? So what we're going to do is we're going to identify 4 different horizons. Okay? The first one is what we call the background horizon. In the background horizon, within college ministry or church plants, we like to keep it within about 5 to 6 years. Okay? Now, if you're a more traditional church, you actually can extend that a little bit longer. I've seen churches that have done a 10-year horizon, a 15-year horizon. My argument with kind of where the churches that we work with is that college ministry is kind of changing so quickly that it requires that beyond the horizon to kind of be a little bit shorter. So we like to kind of 5 to 6 year vision. If you're a church plant, I was talking to somebody, who was I talking? Oh, Ethan from the Well Network. We were talking about in his church plant, there's kind of 2 short-term cycles of a horizon. Cycle number 1 is, can we get this church started? And cycle number 2 is like, can we make it sustainable enough so it doesn't die? Right? So there's kind of these 2 short-term cycles that are like, are we going to get this church off the ground? Is this church going to be sustainable? So often we see the sweet spot is really about 5 to 6 years. Okay. So what you want to begin to do is say, okay, what is the picture that I want to create, let's say 6 years down the road? Okay. Now, here's what I want to caution you in this is the realization that each horizon you move in should be a little bit clearer and a little bit more concise. Here's what I mean by that is, so one of the things that when I was in Bible college, I used to live in Washington and would drive across the Columbia River to Oregon to Portland. And if you were look out east, you could see Mount Hood, right? So on Mount Hood, in a clear day, you could see it. Now, when I was driving across the 205 bridge, looking at Mount Hood, could I see all the details of Mount Hood? No, right? But if I were to hop off 205, hit 84, drive over to Sandy, and start weaving my way towards Mount Hood, the closer and closer I get towards it, the more details that I see of it. Okay, so think about, especially for people who love details, I'm less concerned about the nuances and the details of something 6 years from now. I'm looking for kind of big, hey, we're going to plant a church. We're going to send 15 missionaries. Do we know exactly what that looks like? No. Do we know the location of that? Maybe not, right? But we understand directionally what we're trying to, the big rock things that we're trying to accomplish 5 to 6 years from now. The next one is going to be what we call, I actually switched this around. You're going to have to erase this. This is beyond the horizon. The next one is background horizon. Sorry. So the top one is beyond the horizon. Thanks a lot for catching that, Nick. And the next one is background horizon. Okay, so beyond the horizon, background horizon, this is the next 3 years. So here's the question we're asking. Okay, if we're going to be here in 6 years, what are the 4 most strategic initiatives projects or things that need to be accomplished 3 years from now. Right? So you're asking yourself the question, if we're going to be here, where do we need to be 3 years from now that says we're moving in the right direction to accomplish that beyond the horizon vision? Think about this as your long-term vision, and the third one as your long-term strategy. Okay, then we're going to drop down to what we call the mid-ground. The mid-ground is the next 1 year. So if we're going to be here in 3 years, what's the vision that we need to cast to our students and our leaders of saying 1 year from now, here's where we're moving towards? Okay, think about this as being your short-term vision. And then the last one is what we call the foreground. And this is the next 90 days. So we want to look at, if we need to be here in 1 year, in the next 90 days, what are the 4 projects, initiatives, or things that we need to accomplish to be there? So what we're doing is we're running 4 90-day cycles in every year. We're running 3 mid-years in the background. We're running 2 backgrounds in the Beyond the Horizon. So what you're going to do is the first 90 days, you're going to say this is quarter 1 goals. Then the next 90 days is quarter 2. The next 90 days, quarter 3. Then on quarter 4, you're not only you need to flip up and reset the next mid-ground before you build out the next 90 days. Okay? Kind of a tip on this one is reverse engineer this. You start from the end and then walk backwards in the development of your vision. Any questions on that at all? Okay? So here's my encouragement for you. I've given you 3 assessments and 1 tool for vision. My encouragement for you is utilize those assessments to evaluate where you're at. Use this template of the Horizon storyline to build out the different segments and horizons of your vision. Okay? Last thing I want to do is we'll answer any questions, but I wanted to give you, if you're interested there's a couple trainings that I put on these together, videos. And so if you grab that, we'll email that to you. Also, after you submit the stuff for the email, it's also going to flip you to a page to invite you into our community where we drop resources all the time that you can have access to. And then also there's my contact information. You can reach out at any point. If you want to talk through your ministry a little bit more, do some assessments, talk about next steps, we can help you do that. Okay? Any questions? I know you're at the end of the day and things are like...
I would say that one of the things that I struggle with the most is the communicating the vision, not necessarily having it. So maybe what are some of those key, like maybe 2 or 3 key communication tactics?
Yeah, so here's a couple things. Somebody asked that the last one too. And so here's what I would say is think about the different levels of communication. Right? So we think about often communication as just being from the stage. But we actually need to think about how do we help our group leaders cast vision? How do I cast vision one-on-one coffees? How do I do it from the stage? Like you're thinking about not just one vehicle of casting vision, but thinking about how many different types of vision that you can cast. Secondly, what I would say is most students are concerned with the bottom half of the Horizon storyline. So often, even when I'm leading college ministry, is I'll briefly kind of talk about the top, but mostly what I'm hammering is the 1 year and the 90 days, because that's the one that's really they're feeling and impacting. Here's the last thing I would say, is if you can figure out a creative scoreboard for people to see it, it's a great communication tool. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, our team visited Passion City Church in Atlanta, and they had this huge map of Atlanta with light bulbs in it, right? And every time a salvation was made, they screwed in a light bulb and it turned on. So you'd walk in one Sunday and there's a couple more lights on. And then the next Sunday, a few more lights on. And the next Sunday, a few more lights on. So it was giving people a visual representation of what their vision was. right? So there was actually a scoreboard that was helping communicate that consistently. So even if you can think about some creative ways of having some scoreboards for people to understand, I mean, that's why we do thermometers for building campaigns, right? It's a scoreboard for us. So we're keeping it in front of people and like, oh, the thermometer went up. A few more people gave, right? Oh, maybe I should give, so there's that way of like keeping that in front of people. So think about multiple communication vehicles as well as maybe some creative ways to communicate it as well.
Can I make a comment?
Yep.
If you guys aren't following Andy or any of the stuff, do it. Our ministry at MP has been like really turned around for the time that we met to kind of showing us kind of some of the stage stuff. When I kind of started backwards, I was like putting the roof on and Andy kind of steered me straight after Roundup. We met, and then I got to be part of his cohort. So if you get invited to a cohort, go do it. It's worth every single thing. I promise.
Thanks,
and just love this guy. Love and he still checks in on me. He'll check in on me, and I love that. So
thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Like I said, our team's available anytime. You got questions, you want to talk through ministry, you feel like you're stuck, would love to just kind of converse with you. We've got lots of different tools and frameworks that we can help you think through. So reach out to us for sure. Okay? Awesome. Well, you made it. You made it through the long, grueling day of breakout sessions and collabs. So good job. Let me pray for us real quick. Lord, thanks for just the day we've had together here at Roundup. Thanks for the ways you're stirring us and stretching us and continuing to build in us. Give us clarity for moving forward. Thanks for every church, every college student, every ministry that's represented here. Continue to give them vision, strategy for moving forward. We love you so much. In your son's name, amen.